somebody that eats, sleeps, and breathes the game as much as you do. What does that look like for you these next couple of days?
I have to drink the game.
Cheers. Yeah, that was a good call. So the Detroit Lions just wrapped up the best regular season in franchise history, finishing 15-2 and clinching the 1 seed for the very first time. And as a Lions fan, I can confidently say this is the happiest I've ever felt to not watch my team play on wildcard weekend. Now, of course, that brings all kinds of other joys, like cheering for who I want to play the Lions in the divisional round. This is a completely new and unfamiliar feeling to me, and so I thought it would be a good time to return to YouTube and make a video breaking down the 4 possible opponents. Now, it should go without saying, but in case it doesn't, no, the Lions cannot play the Eagles or the Bucks next round because they are the 2 and 3 seeds respectively, which means the soonest the Lions can face them, well, the only way they could face them is the NFC Championship, so not going to talk about them for obvious reasons. So friends, join me today, have a drink, and let's talk about the 4 possible matchups for the Lions in the divisional round. So the way we're going to structure this, we're going to go through those 4 teams, we're going to talk about their strengths, their weaknesses, the challenges that they pose the Lions, where the Lions could take advantage of them, and at the end, I'll break down who I most and least want to see, because look, there's no good options in the playoffs. That's kind of the whole point. You have to beat good teams, and the NFC was unusually stacked, or top heavy, I should say. It was unusually top heavy this year, which means all of the playoff teams are quite good. Now, granted, that was almost not true. We almost had to deal with the Falcons, but the Bucks saved us, so we actually have a lot of good matchups. In fact, all of the NFC matchups, on paper at least, look rather competitive. I don't think there's a single game I look at as having a clear winner either way. So we're just going to go in order based on the highest seed. So we're going to start off with the Rams. So the Rams this season are the classic case of never throwing the towel too early because their start to the season was so brutal. Obviously, they played the Lions in week 1. They lost in overtime. And they low-key should have won. And then they just got absolutely clobbered by injuries. Basically, for the entire front part of the season, they were dealing with injuries. Through just 2 weeks, the Rams managed to have Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Tyler Higbee, Joe Notenboom, KT Leviston, Connor McDermott, Steve Avila, Jonah Jackson, Larnell Mutchison, Darius Williams, Darion Kendrick, and John Johnson III all on injured reserve. 2 weeks in. So it's really not a big surprise that the Rams started the year 1-4. Like, they were just decimated. And obviously they were able to right the ship. After that horrible start and getting to their bye week, they managed to go 9-3 the rest of the season. But they're very interesting in that they're a mix of old and young talent. They have the veteran QB, obviously. Cooper Kupp is still a dog. But then they have young stars like Puka Nacua, Jared Verse, Kobe Turner, and obviously an elite coach as well. On the season, the Rams averaged 344.8 yards per game, 227.5 passing yards, 103.8 rushing yards, 21.6 points per game, and they had 14 giveaways, which was really good. Now, defensively, they allowed 371.2 yards per game, 223.1 passing, 130 rushing, 22.7 points per game, and they were league average with 20 takeaways. And honestly, their defense isn't very good. They have the 2 young defensive linemen that obviously pose a big threat in Verse and Turner, but aside from that, they don't really scare you as a defense. But obviously they gave the Lions troubles in week 1, and like I said, they are a very well-coached team, which kind of elevates their status a little bit. So despite the fact that a lot of their stats are rather mediocre, they get a bump because of that coaching staff, and you know that they have the experience. They've won a Super Bowl, and so they know how to win, quite frankly. They just know how to win. The Lions know this, as in the wild card round, they only won by a single point. It came right down to the wire, and then in week 1, it came down to the wire again, and it just came down to who had the ball first in overtime. The Lions happened to get it first, and they ran it down their throats. But that game was very losable. If you're a Lions fan, you remember it didn't feel very good going into the fourth quarter. The Rams were taking it to the Lions. They mounted a comeback and it looked like they were going to win. So the Rams, definitely a threatening team, definitely present their challenges, despite the fact that they are not a complete team. Now, moving on to the Rams' opponent in the Vikings, we obviously know the well-documented story of the Vikings this season. They have zero expectations. Sam Darnold is the starter. What are they going to do? They're going to win 14 games, apparently, because, yeah, why not? Brian Flores' defense has quickly become one of the more feared units in the league, although not if you're a Detroit Lion, apparently. In the last 2 years since Flores took over, they've allowed 30 or more points just 7 times. In 34 games, just 7 times they've allowed 30 or more points. 4 of them were against the Lions. For whatever reason, the Lions just seem to have their number. Obviously, you can't guarantee that week after week if you keep playing them, but it is worth noting. And of course, the Vikings are the first team in NFL history to win 14 games and be a wildcard team. They're this rare blend of really good, but also the Lions have their number, so it's just weird. On the season, the Vikings offense averaged 366.7 yards per game, 237.6 passing, 109.1 rushing, and 25.4 points per game. They also gave the ball away 21 times, which ranks 19th in the league. Now, defensively, this is where it gets a little finicky, because their defense allowed 355.7 yards per game, 242 yards passing, 93.4 rushing, 19.5 points per game, and they had 33 takeaways, which was first. So this is the weird asterisk you kind of have to put. Because they were such a good run defense, and teams often found themselves behind in these games against the Vikings, they had to throw the ball, which means they put up yards. But that also means they were taking chances, which led to the takeaways that the Vikings got. There's also another factor with the Vikings and Packers that I'll talk about later in terms of the challenges they present. But overall, the Vikings, very fast, very opportunistic defense. And you saw that in the first half of Week 18. The Lions turned the ball over twice. They couldn't generate much of anything. It wasn't until the second half when Jahmyr Gibbs just decided to go Super Saiyan Sonic mode and completely break the dam open. And it should be mentioned that part of the reason the Lions do have the Vikings number is just because of how the Vikings play and how Jared Goff is as a quarterback. Like, the Vikings like to throw a lot of exotic looks, a lot of different blitzes, a lot of disguise coverages, just a lot of things that younger QBs haven't seen before, but that veteran QBs have and are able to diagnose properly. And Jared Goff has also just proven that he's willing to stand in, take a hit to get the ball out. There was a great throw on a 4th and 5 against the Vikings in Week 18. There was another good throw, a couple of great throws he had against the Blitz back in the Week 7 matchup. Like, he has just proven he's willing to take a hit to get the ball out. So the Vikings can throw as many exotic looks as they want. They can get as many free rushers as they want. It's not going to matter because Goff will still find the open guy. Now, there are a lot of questions with Sam Darnold because in the biggest game of his career so far, in that Week 18 game in Detroit, he did not look good at all. He was missing passes. He was under pressure constantly, which caused him to miss more throws. He looked panicked. He just looked like the lights were a little bit too bright. That being said, you know Justin Jefferson will not take that loss well. If they play the Lions again, he is going to go off because he loves playing Detroit. And after the last game with Amik Robertson, that whole thing, yeah, he's not going to go quietly into that good night. So I can confidently say the Vikings, they're a much more complete team than the Rams. They're also very well coached. Kevin O'Connell might be the coach of the year if you don't think Dan Campbell deserves it. I know, bias. But anyways, Vikings, very complete team, very real threat, despite the fact that the Lions have had their number. So I would definitely be more scared of them than the Rams, but that's not to say I'm not scared of the Rams either. I'll break that down in a sec. Now, the only team on this list that the Lions have not played, the Washington Commanders, are just weird. If you followed the Commanders at all this season, actually you haven't even really had to because their highlights have been everywhere, because let's just say they have a certain flair for the dramatic. You have a Hail Mary win against the Chicago Bears. You have basically a Hail Mary against the Cowboys, but then you miss the extra points, so you lose that game anyways, and then you have a last-second win against the Philadelphia Eagles. Just very chaotic in the last 2 minutes of one-score games. And for whatever reason, Jaden Daniels, the offensive rookie of the year, no doubt, he has just been so insane. he just showed he had this magic in the last 2 minutes of games. Like, he just has this ability to pull out wins when he shouldn't. Like, when the game is on the line, he makes these incredible plays that are jaw-dropping, like just logic-defying, and it's helped the Commanders to a playoff spot. So I can tell you right now, the prospect of the Lions and Commanders being in a tie game with under 5 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, terrifying. Absolutely petrifying. Do not want to be in that situation whatsoever. But focusing on what we can actually quantify for a second, their offense averaged 385.4 yards per game, 215.6 passing, 154.1 rushing. Granted, Jane Daniels, mobile quarterback, it is a factor that we have to, at least acknowledge. 28.5 points per game and 16 giveaways. They are top 10 in every category except passing, which is very impressive. Now, defensively, this is the inverse Vikings problem. They allowed 342.9 yards per game, 189.5 passing, 137.5 rushing, 23 points per game, and they only had 17 takeaways. Now, you're going to look at that and be like, okay, they're third in passing yards allowed, but they're 30th in rushing yards. What happened? Well, I can tell you what happened. When you can run a ball on a team, you're not going to want to pass it because it's riskier. If you can run the ball, you run the ball. On the yards per game metric, the Commanders defense looks really good against the pass, but it's really just because teams don't have to pass against them as much because they can run the ball. It should be noted they did acquire Marshawn Lattimore at the trade deadline. He is a legit shutdown corner, so that is a factor that has to be taken into account in, projecting a potential matchup. But the Commanders defense in general just is a lot more bend don't break. Like, they're just trying to hold you to field goals. You're going to be able to get yards on them. You're going to be able to run the ball. It really just comes down to, can you finish drives in the end zone? Now, moving on to the final team on this list, the Green Bay Packers. Now, the Green Bay Packers are perfectly encapsulated by their quarterback, Jordan Love. He is the agent of chaos, and you will do nothing but bear witness to whatever he has to do. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, and whatever it is will determine the outcome of the game. If Love plays good, the Packers win. If Love plays bad, the Packers lose. It's pretty simple, but it really is a little bit more complicated than that because he can be good or bad in the same game. He's one of the funniest quarterbacks in the league, and I know everyone's been hailing him as this super elite guy, and he's living up to the contract, and is he? Look, I'm not trying to discredit Jordan Love. He has incredible talent. He's just gotta put it together a little bit better because the inconsistency really was on display, especially in some of the losses this season. The game in Detroit, Love played very well in. The Packers put up 31 points. He did pretty well. He might have had a couple missed throws here or there, but in general, that was his best divisional game of the season, of the 6, which, woo. So when focusing on the Lions and Packers game in Lambeau, the 2 games against the Vikings, the loss against the Bears, even the win against the Bears, Jordan Love was an adventure. The first game against the Vikings, he turned the ball over early. The Packers were getting smoked, and then they almost mounted a late comeback when the Vikings kind of eased off a little bit. The Lions game in Lambeau, a Jordan Love horrible pick 6 at the end of the first half kind of shifted the entire tone for the game as the Lions jumped out to a 2-possession lead as a result of that. They quickly got another touchdown to start the second half, and then the Lions went on cruise control the rest of the way. And then the second game against the Vikings might have been his worst as a pro, honestly. It might have been his worst game as a pro. I also just realized I tried to reference the game that just happened against the Bears. He got hurt. He left that game. So, yeah. Please don't yell at me about that. But the team is more than just Jordan Love, so let's talk about the whole team briefly. The Packers as an offense averaged 378.5 yards per game, 223.9 passing, 146.8 rushing, 27.1 points per game, and they had 19 giveaways, which was on the better side of average. Now, defensively, they allowed 332.2 yards per game, 215.2 passing yards, 99.4 rushing yards, 19.9 points per game, and they had a whopping 31 takeaways. Now, a lot of those takeaways could, of course, be credited to Xavier McKinney, who might have been one of the better free agent signings in the league last offseason because, He was an absolute ball hawk in that secondary. He was a turnover machine. He had a ton of tackles. He was just everywhere for that defense. He ended up finishing second in the league in interceptions. And the guy who finished first? That guy. Right, but McKinney was absolutely incredible this year, and he is obviously a big threat for that defense. And, the defense as a whole for the Packers was actually quite good. It's going to be fascinating to see how they match up against the Eagles the second time around, because in the first matchup, McKinney had, I think, 2 picks in that game. Jordan Love was slinging it, but they still ended up losing because, well, the defense just couldn't stand up to Saquon Barkley, hurts his mobility. A.J. Brown went off as well. And also the Brazil field was just garbage. So playing on an actual football field that's maintained would actually be a benefit to both teams, if in case you're watching for quality of play. But it's going to be a great game, and I'm really looking forward to all the NFC matchups. Now, when breaking down why the Lions were able to beat the Packers this season, both games, it comes down to a few things. One, in Green Bay, getting a pick 6 obviously helps at the end of the half. The rain limiting the Packers' passing offense helps a little bit. In Detroit, the offense was just humming. But fourth downs also had a big part in this. Like, the Lions went 5 for 6 on fourth down across the 2 games, and they were scoring touchdowns on those fourth downs. There was a 4th and goal in the game in Detroit where Jahmyr Gibbs catches a Texas route because the Texas route is undefeated. There was a 4th down from like the 12, or it might have been the 15-yard line in Lambeau where, again, Jahmyr Gibbs takes a run up the middle and he just goes to the house. So those are very consequential plays, and if the Packers get stops on those plays, the results are going to be a lot closer and maybe even flipped. So with that being said, who do I want to see in the second round as a Lions fan? Because I can quickly identify who I don't want to see, which is the Packers and Vikings. And you might be thinking, Zach, why? The Lions beat them both twice. They're 4-0 against those 2 teams this season. Why would you not want to see them again? You can make it 3-0. Everyone could laugh at the other team. It'd be great. And that's exactly the problem. It is really hard to beat a team 3 times in a season. That was precisely why I was concerned going into the Week 18 game against the Vikings, is that the Lions had beat the Vikings like 4 times in a row. It's hard to maintain a winning streak. Look at Week 18. Even the Bears showed that they can beat the Packers. They ended the Packers winning streak against them because it's so hard to maintain these streaks. The Packers proved that last year after the Lions had been kicking their ass for a couple years in a row. They came into Detroit on Thanksgiving last year and they took it to the Lions. The Lions weren't ready for that game. The Packers had that one circled on their calendar and they destroyed them. I know the final score was like 29-22, but the Packers really kicked their ass. I will say I am still a little bit more scared of the Packers just because Jordan Love has kind of proven over the last few years that when he's on his game, he can beat the Lions. And it really just comes down to the fact that he's willing to push the ball downfield. We saw it on Thanksgiving last year. We saw it in the game in Detroit on Thursday Night Football. Like, when he pushes the ball downfield, the Packers have a lot more success. Who would have thought? As for the Vikings, it's really just that their defense is so opportunistic. They got the 2 turnovers against Detroit in Week 18. And honestly, if their red zone offense was better than 0 for 4, they probably keep that competitive. And obviously the game got out of hand, but if a game is a 1-score game going into the 4th, a turnover could be the difference. The Vikings are capable of beating the Lions is kind of the headline here. They almost beat them with Nick Mullins last year in Minnesota. So, it's just worth noting that these divisional games are always relatively close. There's some anomalies in there, but in general, most divisional games are close. And when you add in the fact the Lions have already beat them twice, yeah, it's a little bit scarier for both those teams. The Rams are also very weird just because Stafford is so good. He clearly has a chip on his shoulder when playing against Kirby Joseph after that whole, like, you're a dirty player clip, which completely ruined Kirby's reputation, by the way. And when you look at the Vikings, the Packers, the Rams, those 3 teams hold one thing in common that actually does scare me for a legitimate reason, and that's coaching. Between Sean McVay, Kevin O'Connell, and Matt LaFleur, the Rams, Vikings, and Packers, respectively, might have 3 of the top 10 coaches in the NFL. These coaches, there's a reason that these teams are so good in 1-score games, and you look at all the teams that are best in the league in 1-score games, they mostly have good coaches. Which leads me to the team that I would quote-unquote want to see the most, but it's more so a team that I'm not quite as scared of as the other three, and that's the Commanders. Jaden Daniels is the offensive rookie of the year, but he is still a rookie, which means you could throw some concepts at him that are maybe a little bit more exotic that he hasn't seen before that can maybe rattle him a bit. And Quinn, I give him full credit for the work he's done this season. The Commanders have been very good. Cliff Kingsbury, on the other hand, I don't give as much credit. I think Jaden Daniels is propping up a lot with his legs and his ability to escape pressure and run for first downs. There was that play against the Eagles on 4th and 11 where he scrambled for like 30 yards. Like, he's just an extremely rare talent that makes up for some of the coaching deficiencies that he's dealing with. We all know Cliff Kingsbury's record in the second half of seasons and in the playoffs from back at Texas Tech and with the Cardinals. He gets worse as the season goes on. That's been a little bit different this year, but it's not like the Commanders have been world beaters. And obviously, we talked about the run defense earlier. The Lions, if they can run the ball, have a pretty good chance to win the game because they'll be able to control tempo, control the time of possession, keep the Commanders' offense off the field, and just, generally drive down the field and score points, which they do in abundance. With David Montgomery coming back too, they'll be able to wear that defense down. Jahmyr Gibbs is the lightning bolt that everyone is just completely in awe of right now, as he finished the season with 1,929 yards and 20 total touchdowns. When you look at the 4 possible matchups and you look at the Lions' odds against them, you can see a path to beating all of them, obviously. There is no world where the Lions are not favored in the divisional round, but you look at the 4 matchups and the Commanders are the team that it's the most likely that the Lions will win. In general, an NFL game at most would be like a 58% chance, 60% chance that a team would win. Against the Commanders, it'd probably be like 55% the Lions would win, whereas the other 3, it's probably 52%. It's a lot closer to 50-50. But I'd be very curious to hear what you guys have to say, whether you're a Lions fan and you agree with me, disagree with me. If you're a fan of another team, maybe you're a fan of one of these 4 teams, you can tell me how you feel about the potential matchup with the Lions if you were to get there. So yeah, that's gonna be it for this video. If you've been subscribed to me, I'm really sorry that I've gone so long without uploading. I really just lost motivation with the gaming videos. I wanted to find something that I don't know, was a little bit more engaged with, which, is analysis. And I like digging into teams, to statistics and the film and just breaking down matchups and kind of, analyzing the game that we all love. I don't know how frequent these uploads are going to be. I'm going to try my best to do a video a week as we get into the playoffs here in the off season and beyond, because, I do like making videos, and obviously I love talking about football, and, everyone that's watching this, I'm sure you love watching football and talking about football too. So, maybe we can have some common ground here and have a good time. If you've gotten this far and you've been interested in what I have to say, please go check out my podcast, The Pain and Drain Show. I run it with my buddy Alex Drain. It's a Detroit Lions-based podcast. We do talk a little bit broader NFL as well, but if you want more Lions analysis, we go way more in depth there than I could possibly go in a 10 or 12 minute video, so go check it out. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe down below so that you never miss another upload. I'll probably be back next week previewing the divisional round matchup for the Lions, or maybe I'll do a more broad divisional round breakdown for the NFL in general. So thanks for indulging me in this little ramble, rant, analysis type video. Enjoy the weekend of wildcard action, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.